Yo, welcome back to part 5 of a series about the lore behind dev specs and the origins of them, and I'll be rating them on 3 categories: PvP, PvE, and overall use. It won't be counting custom races with some exceptions, but mainly custom abilities. Anyway, let's get to the video. Nuttoons, or Stag Acrossus, has a spec that is mainly lore with some interesting buffs from his bewitchment, or the vow he was born with. The bewitchment manifests on his arms with runes that burn. The more they burn, the more powerful he becomes. Like, all senses are boosted and he has insane raw strength when they're burning. But to stop them from burning, he wears the stag wraps to limit his power. As well as in the lore, he has future vision, but I'll explain more about that in the next segment. The origins of Stag's bewitchment is very vague. He was bewitched at birth by an entity that only Nuttoons knows himself. As far as the future vision goes, Stag used to be very close in the ministry and studied there for a while. And while studying there, the main thing he studied was the passages of the song. This for some reason gave him the ability to peek into the future. Now, because I said he studied with the ministry, you must expect him to be a very bad guy or a villain, but it's quite the opposite. Once obtaining future vision, he saw into the future and saw the ministry causing the drowning. He knew this was their goal, but seeing it himself in his future vision was very, very hard. He knew it was wrong, so he cut all ties with the ministry and is now completely neutral and doesn't see conflict at all. Which, you know, you'd kinda assume because he's 8,700 years old. The reason he's so old is because the bewitchment keeps him alive, definitely, giving him immortality. As to what he's doing present day, Nuttoons says that Stag sort of just chills around Great Hive, and Stag allegedly lives in the coffee room of the mod office. But that's not confirmed. For PvP, his specs can be pretty good lore-wise, but in game there isn't much. He's basically a regular person with buff talents like Ghost and some others. So because of that, I'm gonna rate his specs based off lore, instead of in-game. His future vision would be pretty good in fights because he can see what the enemy is doing before they do it, and if he takes off his arm wraps, then he can do some serious damage in PvP. So for his lore abilities, I think he's pretty exceptional and still pretty balanced, and his buffed and 8 talents definitely put him up there in PvP and game as well. For PvE, the Ghost and the future vision will be pretty good for evading certain situations in PvE, as well as combating them. His buffed sense and raw strength definitely do a big part in PvE and PvP, but I have no idea how catastrophic his buff strength is. I'd assume if he wears wraps to calm it down, it's gotta be pretty strong. So he'd do extremely effective damage to monsters, along with being able to see what they do before they actually do it. He'd be an insane PvEer. He would be far above the average player for PvE. Overall, he's the most balanced spec in game, with his in-game buffs mainly being innate talents from his bewitchment. His lore abilities are probably my favorite yet because they're extremely cool and effective without being insanely overpowered like Archmage's lore abilities. It's pretty good overall, but not the best. For rating it, I'm gonna have to give it a 7.5. My reason for this is because his spec is pretty good, but nowhere as effective as the Phoenix or Arcturus spec. But it's still my favorite so far and has interesting lore behind it. Anyway, if you haven't seen parts 1 to 4, I strongly encourage you to go watch them. I'm gonna make one of these about every single character with a spec, so comment down below who y'all want next, like and sub, and I'll see y'all next time.